Welcome back, Wargamers, and today I wanted to have sort of a different video for you. You see, I spend so much time talking about Age of Sigmar lore, and mainly that's just because I love it. I love the epic fantasy and the impossible monsters and logic that we see, right? So much of that, hopefully, has made it into this channel, and I think that's why this channel has boomed over a very short time. Because I think I get others excited about these things as well. At least, of course, that's always the stated goal. However, there are some parts of the lore that I rarely touch on. Not because I specifically don't like them, but because we simply don't know enough to like or dislike them. Of course, that's a personal opinion. I cannot stress that enough. Things were super vague when Age of Sigmar launched, and while the setting is always being fleshed out in new and exciting ways, there are just a few specific points that I think we need more information on to make them extremely compelling. These are types of story setups where there is a narrative that could be very fascinating in there. It just hasn't been written, to put it really simply. So I picked my top few topics that I think Games Workshop should dive into more. Now, if these interest you whatsoever, don't forget to subscribe and leave your suggestions down below for what you would like GW to dig into more. Starting off my list is when Nurgle enters Giran. One of my favorite parts of the Age of Sigmar 2nd edition core book is the exploration of the realms. And if you don't know what I mean, go watch my videos on Akshi and Chaman because I guarantee you'll enjoy it. The biggest reason I love them is that it really paints a picture of just how chaos came into those respective realms. For Akshi, it was this drama between nation states, and some very technologically or magically adept, and others are very primitive and very primal, and it set the stage for Khorne to enter in a big way. I loved it because it shows us a glimpse of the Age of Myth, but also how that society called out to the Chaos Gods, particularly Khorne. And then you have Chaman, where several nations were working together to get rid of a god beast, but were infiltrated and tricked by a dark wizard who tore open a portal to Tzeentch's realm. I'm gravely oversimplifying that, but it's kind of the crux. The real point I'm getting to is that the two realms that we just talked about have incredible stories for how chaos entered them. Right? With such force, such magnitude that the Age of Chaos kind of became inevitable. And really was as epic as it sounds. And even though Giran was one of the original 3 realms we explored at the launch of Age of Sigmar, the Realmgate Wars took place in Akshi, Giran, and Chaman. The truth is, we know very little about chaos entering Giran. We don't have a good idea or any kind of vision of what this initial cataclysm was like. We do know that there was a time where Nurgle was gaining ascendance, and this was called the War of Life, where Alarielle and her Sylvaneth and mortal allies at the time, remember this is the Age of Myth, so there's still some elves in the woods and that kind of stuff, they tried to push back the Plague God, but honestly, that's really all we have, right? I mean, there was a description in the Sylvaneth book about Nurgle seeping into Giran, but that doesn't give us a picture in the same way that Khorne entering Akshi or Tzeentch and Chaman do. I would love for a new character or faction to be introduced that really fleshes out that time period. What was the catalyst for Nurgle punching through in force, right? What happened that was so devastating that he just swept right through the realm? We know so little about Giran in general, and I really wanted to learn more about it, because as a Magickin player, these are the questions that I can use to create background. And the same goes for Cities of Sigmar players with re-establishing order in that realm. Did their ancestors, once claim domain over these lands and it was taken from them in some big dramatic event? All that stuff, I would love to know more. We already have these cool settings in terms of Giran and that kind of stuff, and multiple factions fighting in and for it, but we just need that little nudge to understand how we got here. Next up is the cities in Ghur. Now, if you haven't read the book Spear of Shadows, I highly recommend it. Fantastic book. It's a cool adventure novel where an unlikely team of human fire slayers and more all have to work together. It's kind of like, honestly, the perfect D&D setup. If I'm just going to level with you, I love it, and it's done really, really well. Well, one of the locations that this crew in that novel visits derailed me completely from the main story, but like in a good way. The heroes enter into a city in Ghur built upon the back of a giant like slug or worm. It's crazy slow and is just creeping along the plains of Ghur. Its size is unimaginable, and it's like this big city is built inside of it. This is not a small town, nothing like that. This is a metropolis. And while the story doesn't actually spend a lot of time here, I found it deeply interesting. You see, there were reports of a Skaven infestation there as well, and so under a city, burrowing into this gigantic beast is the Skaven Den. And I can't remember the name of it, but there is a Pestilence short story that depicts the fight between Clan Pestilence forces and Stormcast Eternals in this setting, or at least to a very similar one. It was actually one of the earliest short stories they released for Age of Sigmar. That's kind of what my memory's failing me, but now I'll be honest. I don't want every big city of order in Ghur to be built inside of a beast, but I think it's a fascinating take on what it means to survive in such a predator versus prey world. We know that people generally don't build large cities in Ghur because every geological feature is sort of a living thing like an animal, and everything's trying to kill you, right? Your city can be consumed by a mountain or, absorbed into the gullet of a river or lake. The city mentioned above here gets around this by affixing itself to a creature in motion who, through self-perseverance, will make sure it doesn't hit any of those dangers. But for other civilizations, they favor light and highly mobile lifestyles, camps, tents, very rugged means of survival. I'd love to know more about Ghur in general, but specifically what cities of order, right, bastions, outposts, whatever you want to call them, look like there. Because I suspect there are some really more interesting examples of how wildly different humans can look in other environments. These people aren't dumb or primitive, but their defining feature would have to be adaptability, otherwise they would just be eaten. So just like they adapted to hitching a ride with an existing organism, they could do the same thing with like mountains, or maybe have some floating city that draws in big monsters that the sea consumes, or something. They use like they're basically using water as a defense. Or maybe they've built kind of a honeycomb-like city into the walls of a giant fissure, something like that. There are a lot of possibilities here that could really be cool to explore, and I want to see every one of them. Next up is the Everwinter. Now, if you've been a subscriber for a long time, first off, thank you. You just made my day. But secondly, you may have noticed that I didn't cover Beastclaw Raiders all that much when that book was released, and even when it was merged into Maw tribes, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on the Beastclaw part. And I promise, it's not because I dislike the faction. I love ogres. I love their size, their playing style, army building, their background's cool. I love it. But what I struggled with since Beastclaw Raiders first dropped was the idea of the Everwinter, a supernatural storm that follows every BCR army or warband. And it's this storm that forces the Beastclaw Raiders unit specifically into a fully nomadic lifestyle. Because if the storm ever, envelops them, they straight up freeze. And when I hear that, I love it. What a cool concept, right? Until you realize that this rough idea for a concept is pretty much as deep as it goes. There are a few conflicting mentions about its origins, and some say it's a blessing by Gorka Morka to aid them in hunting, others say it's a curse for some unknown slight, maybe it's the curse of some other deity or entity. That's about it. That's all we get. And the question only gets more complicated with the inclusion of Gutbusters into the Maw Tribe's battle tome, when they brought the two factions together, because, well, if a Frostlord is the only Beastclaw unit in the army, does the Everwinter follow them? What happens when that lord falls in battle? Does it stick with the army? What happens when tribes divide? Does one storm become two? What are other possible origins for the storm, right? If you're familiar, I praised endlessly the Beasts of Chaos book because, they didn't give you a definitive reason for why the Beasts of Chaos exist, but they were like, here's the deal. Hysh scholars have 3 major lines of thought. And it was almost like an academic style of like, we don't know for certain, but here's some really compelling evidence into this theory. And I love that breakdown of having things be mysterious where they're very well thought out possibilities, but we're not going to commit to any of them. And I just kind of wish they had done that with the Everwinter. I would love a grand narrative of Gorkamorka cursing or blessing people, because right now he's just kind of always doing his own thing. He doesn't seem very directly involved with any destruction armies. But you can imagine how cool it would be if Gorkamorka was like, alright everybody, we're gonna go conquer the realms for the biggest and the bestest fight possible. But you need to face the intensity and power of the realms like no other, because he uses the environment as his weapon, because he's so wild and uncontrollable. It's like the realms are fighting back against you, and what represents that as his doomsday weapon? Oh, the Everwinter would be incredible in that sense if it was used as a weapon, if there was this cool story behind it. Yes, a million times yes. I would love it, absolutely, just hands down. But right now, we have to settle for, oh yeah, and it's always Christmas when these fat boys come by. And that's, you know what I mean? It's just not there. It wouldn't take much leaning into a narrative at all to make this part of a really epic story of Gorkamorka bucking off all of the, the shackles of civilization and order and that kind of stuff. I think it would be really cool. And the last pick that I have today for stuff that I think we need to expand upon more is godhood. For my last one, I picked something we've kind of been discussing since the Rumgate Wars, and with the release of the Archaon model, what makes a character a god in Age of Sigmar? And we know there's different kinds of deity. Chaos gods and Gorkamorka, strangely enough, are sort of these primordial forces, almost part of nature of reality itself. At least that's how it was described in one White Dwarf article. But then there's the Pantheon, where mortals were bound to winds of magic and somehow ascended to some next level. The reason this distinction matters is that we have two of the coolest characters in lore both trying to attain some level of godhood, right? You have Archaon the Everchosen, Grand Marshal of the Apocalypse, and of course, Morathi from the Daughters of Cain. Archaon is looking to attain this power through conquest, while Morathi is working on it through trickery and subterfuge, but in the end, there still has to be some point where they go from not being a god to being one, or not having achieved their goal to having achieved it. Maybe a great way to frame all of this would be just frankly to have more books where the gods interact a bit more, maybe set in the Age of Myth. They still work together, but the fractures in the Pantheon are beginning to show, the haves and the have-nots, the different types of power, that kind of thing. We can see more of the gods, their origins, what separates them, and how that separation compares to really powerful characters, just not deities, like Morathi, I think, is a perfect example. She's part of the Pantheon, integral to making civilization grow and spread, specifically in Ulgu, but also everywhere. And she's not a god, but she has this next level power, right? Same thing with Archaon, where it's like, okay, you're not just a dude, man, bro, right? You're not a normal person. You're something else. But what is that line between you now and what you want to be? And so I just want to understand what that level of power is like, and in so doing, we can learn a lot more about the gods of Age of Sigmar, their limits, their scope, their personality, their kind of built-in flaws and things like that. Establishing what makes something a deity can also tell us a lot about the tribes across the realms, because they revere these people for certain aspects, and ultimately how those beliefs can be twisted or hijacked by chaos to enter the realms in the first place. So friends, those are my thoughts, my top picks for things that I would love to see explored or kind of expanded upon in the Black Library catalog. Tell me your thoughts down below. Do you have a specific story or a narrative arc that you want some clarification on? And specifically, I'm going to ask it this way, things that would improve the universe totally, right? When I say Nurgle enters Giran, that affects so many factions, because so many factions are tied in some way to Giran. And notably, one of the gods themselves. Like, it's a very important thing, not just for Nurgle and not just for Alariel. Do you have any other things like that that are kind of these sweeping realizations that if you knew more about this, it would change the nature of the setting in a cool and unique way? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to read them. Thank you all so much, and happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me, and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.